daughter called me a danger to my own grandchildren while I was still wearing a hospital bracelet with my name on it. I remember the exact moment. I was sitting in the passenger seat of my son-in-law's truck, barely 20 minutes out of the cardiac unit, and my phone buzzed against my thigh. Her name on the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail. My chest was still sore from the catheter they'd threaded in 4 days earlier, and the medication made my hands feel like they belonged to someone else. But something in the way the phone kept buzzing 3 times, 4 told me this wasn't a check-in call. I answered. Dad. Her voice was flat, not worried. Not relieved that I was finally being discharged. Flat the way concrete is flat. I'm in the car, sweetheart. Just leaving the hospital. I know. That's why I'm calling now. A pause. I need you to know that I've spoken to a family attorney about the children. I looked out the window at the overpass going by. Traffic moving normally, like the world hadn't just shifted under me. What about the children? About supervised visitation, she said, going forward. My son-in-law kept his eyes on the road. He'd heard. I could tell by the way his jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I don't understand what you're saying, I told her, though I was starting to. The kids told me things, Dad. Things that worried me. And honestly, given your health and some of your behaviors lately, I think it's better for everyone if we just put some structure in place. Behaviors. That word landed like a stone in still water. I was 63 years old. I had spent 31 years as a structural engineer. I had coached my grandson's Little League team for 2 seasons before my heart started giving me trouble. I had never once raised a hand or my voice to either of those children, and I was sitting in a truck with a discharge bracelet on my wrist being told I needed supervised visits with my own grandkids. I asked her to repeat what she meant. She said she'd rather not get into it over the phone. Then she hung up. The house felt different when I got home. Not in a dramatic way. No furniture moved. No lights off that should have been on. Just a stillness that hadn't been there before. The way a room feels after someone's already left it. I set my discharge papers on the kitchen counter and stood there for a minute. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a truck rolled past on the street. Ordinary sounds from an ordinary afternoon. My wife. My second wife. We'd been married 11 years, was visiting her sister in Tucson. She'd wanted to come back early when I went into the hospital, and I told her not to. It was a stent procedure, not open heart. The doctors were confident. I didn't want her cutting the trip short over something I genuinely believed we had under control. In hindsight, I should have let her come back. I sat down at the kitchen table and tried to reconstruct what my daughter had said. Supervised visitation. Family attorney. The kids told me things. I went through the last few months in my mind, looking for the moment that could have been misread, the afternoon that could have been twisted into something it wasn't. There had been a day in March when my grandson fell off his bike in my driveway. He scraped his knee badly. I cleaned it, put a bandage on it, and he cried for about 10 minutes, and then wanted to go back outside. I'd said no because it was getting dark. He was frustrated with me. Kids get frustrated. That was the worst thing I could find. The next morning, I called my daughter back. She didn't answer. I texted. She replied 4 hours later with 3 sentences. She said she thought some space would be good for everyone. She said she hoped I'd use my recovery time to reflect. She said she'd be in touch through her attorney when she was ready. Through her attorney. I read that 3 times. I wasn't angry, not exactly. What I felt was something quieter and more disorienting, like standing in a room where the walls have moved an inch in every direction, and nothing is where your body remembers it being. I called my younger brother. He lives about 40 minutes away, retired from the post office, steady as a fence post. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is something he's always been good at. Do you know what attorney she's using? He asked when I finished. I didn't. Do you have any idea what the kids supposedly said? I didn't have that either. Then the first thing you do, he said, is get your own attorney, today if you can. I told him I'd just gotten out of the hospital yesterday. I know, he said. That's why you do it today, while the timeline is fresh and the paperwork is right in front of you. That was the first shift. Up until that call, I'd been treating this like a misunderstanding that would untangle itself if I waited long enough. My brother's voice cut through that. Not harshly, just honestly. I called a family law attorney that afternoon, A woman who'd been recommended to me years ago by a colleague when he was going through his own divorce. I'd never needed her services, but I'd kept the number. She answered on the second ring. I explained the situation. She asked me to slow down and start from the beginning. I did. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Not the kind of quiet that means confusion. The kind that means calculation. Has your daughter made any formal filing? She asked. Not that I know of. Has anyone contacted you officially? A court officer, a social worker, any government agency? No. Okay. Another pause. Mister, and I gave her my name. I want you to do something before we talk further. I want you to gather every piece of documentation you have from your hospital stay. Admission records, discharge papers, nursing notes if you can request them, any visitor logs, and I want the dates of every time you saw those grandchildren in the past 6 months. I told her I could have the hospital records by the end of the week. Get them sooner, she said, and don't reach out to your daughter again until we've spoken. I wrote that down. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote out every visit I could remember. Dates, who else was present, what we did, Thanksgiving at my daughter's house, my birthday dinner in February, the Little League game in April, where my grandson hit his first real double, and I'd almost stood up too fast and gotten dizzy. I wrote all of it down. Not as a defense, not yet, just as a record. A way of saying to myself, here's what actually happened. I slept better than I expected. By the following morning, I'd requested my full medical records from the cardiac unit. The charge nurse I spoke to was efficient and unhurried. She said it would take 48 hours. I asked if there was any way to flag a priority release, and she made a note. She didn't ask why. People in hospitals understand documentation. While I waited, I called my son-in-law. He and I had always gotten along. He's a quiet man, works in logistics, coaches the same Little League team I used to help with. He picked up on the second ring. I was wondering when you'd call, he said. Do you know what's going on? He exhaled. I know some of it. Can you tell me? A pause. She said the kids told her they were scared of you. I felt the air go out of the room. Scared of me, I repeated. That's what she said. Which kids? My grandson is 9. My granddaughter is 6. Both, I think. I kept my voice level. When did they say this? I don't know the exact. I think it was around the time you went into the hospital. She was stressed, they were upset because you were sick, and I think something they said got amplified. I don't think they meant it the way she took it. But she's already talked to an attorney. He didn't say anything for a moment. Yeah, she moved fast. Fast. The word sat in my chest like something with weight. Do you think I'm a danger to your children? I asked him. Another pause, shorter this time. No, he said. I don't. Thank you. For what it's worth, he added, I think she's scared. About your health. And sometimes when she's scared, she gets... He stopped himself. She manages it by taking control of things. I understood that. I'd watched my daughter do it her whole life. She'd gotten it from her mother, my first wife, who'd also responded to uncertainty by building walls and calling them structure. But understanding something doesn't make it harmless. The medical records arrived in 46 hours. I went through them at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a yellow highlighter. 4 days of admission records. Nursing notes logged every 8 hours with timestamps. Medication administration log with times down to the minute. Visitor logs showing my son-in-law on day 1, my brother on day 2, my wife calling in twice from Tucson. I flagged every entry that fell on a date. My daughter might later claim I'd been somewhere else, doing something else. I didn't know yet what the specific allegations were, but I knew what documents looked like when someone was building a case, and I knew the best thing I could do was have an equally solid structure on my side before that case got any further. I called my attorney and told her I had everything. We met 2 days later. She sat across from me in a sensible office with natural light and no clutter, which I took as a good sign. People who manage information well usually show it in their physical space. I spread the records across her desk. She went through them methodically. Here's what I see, she said after a while. You have 4 consecutive days of documented hospital presence. You have nursing notes that log your location every 8 hours. You have a visitor log that corroborates your account of who came to see you. And before the hospitalization? I asked. She mentioned behaviors, plural, like there's a pattern. She nodded. That's what we need to address next. I want you to write down every interaction you had with those grandchildren in the 6 months prior. Not just dates, but context. Who else was there, what the mood was, whether anything was said that could be reframed. I showed her the legal pad. She looked it over. This is good, she said. This is actually very good. Then she leaned back slightly. I want to ask you something directly. Is there anything, any moment, even a small one, where you lost your temper, said something harsh, scared them, even accidentally? I thought about it honestly, not defensively. There was the evening my grandson pushed back about a rule, and I'd raised my voice slightly. I'd apologized within the hour, and he'd hugged me before bed. There was a moment my granddaughter had startled when I'd come around a corner too quickly, and she'd cried, and I'd felt terrible about it for days. I told my attorney both of those. She wrote them down. Those aren't incidents, she said. Those are Tuesday. But I appreciate that you told me. That was the second shift. I'd gone from absorbing the shock to cooperating with the process. And process, I was learning, was the only language that actually mattered in rooms like this. My daughter called 3 days later. First contact since the initial call. She asked carefully how I was recovering. I said I was well. She said she hoped there were no hard feelings. I told her I had retained an attorney and that further communication about the grandchildren should go through her. Silence. Long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. You got a lawyer, she said finally. You said you had one. It seemed fair. Dad, I was just trying to protect. I know, I said. That's what my attorney will explain. She hung up again, but differently this time. Not with anger, with something that sounded more like recalibration. The following week, I found out more. Not from her, but from my son-in-law, who called me on a Tuesday morning while she was at work. I think you should know something, he said. There's money involved. I asked him what he meant. He took a breath. Your life insurance and the property. She's been talking to someone, not just the family attorney, about how things would be structured if your health gets worse. What she'd be entitled to as her heir versus what your wife would get. I sat with that for a moment. She thinks I'm going to die, I said. She thinks it's a possibility, he said carefully. And I think she got scared, and someone advised her that establishing, I don't know, instability or a concern about your behavior might matter later. Legally. Instability. There was that shape again. The one being built around me while I was lying in a hospital bed. Who is she talking to? I asked. He hesitated. A man she works with. He's not an attorney, but he's been through a messy estate situation himself, and he thinks he knows how these things work. I wrote the name down when he gave it to me. I didn't know the man, never met him. But I knew the type. Someone who'd been through enough bureaucracy to feel like an expert, giving advice that fit his situation onto someone else's. I called my attorney immediately. She listened, asked 2 questions, and then said something I've thought about many times since. People don't reach for legal frameworks when they're grieving, she said. They reach for them when they're positioning. She said we needed to move in 2 directions at once. First, a formal letter to my daughter's attorney requesting the basis for any claims of behavioral concern, specific dates, specific incidents, specific witnesses. If there was a real complaint, it needed to be on paper where I could respond to it. If there wasn't, the request itself would clarify things quickly. Second, she recommended I update my estate documents. Not reactively, she was careful to say that, but because I'd had a cardiac event and hadn't revisited them in years. Powers of attorney, beneficiary designations, end-of-life directives. Things I should have updated anyway. I told her I'd handle it that week. She also said something quieter, almost as an aside. If your daughter is acting on advice from someone who doesn't understand estate law, the formal letter will probably stop this before it starts. People like that tend to go quiet when actual attorneys get involved. She was right. The letter went out. My daughter's attorney responded within 5 business days. The response acknowledged that no formal filing had been made. It referenced ongoing concerns in language vague enough to mean nothing and specific enough to sound official. My attorney wrote back requesting that any ongoing concerns be documented with dates and evidence. No response came. Not because the concerns disappeared, but because they'd never been concrete enough to survive contact with the formal process. During this time, I updated my will. I sat in a different attorney's office and a state specialist and went through everything line by line. My wife would be provided for. My daughter would receive what I'd always intended, unchanged. Nothing punitive, nothing retaliatory. I wasn't doing it to punish anyone. I was doing it because a 63-year-old man who just had a stent placed has no business leaving his affairs ambiguous. The estate attorney, a calm man in his late 50s with reading glasses he kept taking off and putting back on, said something that landed. Most families end up in conflict not because someone is malicious, he said, but because nobody wrote anything down. I thought about my daughter, about fear making people strategic, about advice from the wrong source arriving at exactly the wrong moment. I didn't think she was a bad person. I thought she'd gotten scared, and then she'd gotten busy, and the two things had combined into something that looked intentional, but was really just momentum. That didn't mean the consequences were any less real. 6 weeks after my discharge, I requested a conversation with my daughter. Through our attorneys, which felt absurd, we had dinner at a restaurant halfway between our houses, her idea, which I took as a sign she was ready to stop building and start talking. She looked tired. Not guilty exactly, but tired in the way people look when they've been maintaining a story that required more effort than they expected. We ordered food and didn't talk about any of it until the food arrived. Old habit from her childhood. Difficult conversations always went better with something in front of you to look at. She said, "I think I panicked." I said, "I know. You were in the hospital and I kept thinking, what if you don't come out?" And then everything felt so. She stopped. "Unprotected. You could have called me," I said. "You were sick. I'm your father." She looked down at her plate. "The man I talked to, at work, he made it sound like there were things I needed to do, quickly, before something happened." "What man?" I asked, though I already knew. She gave me the name. Same name my son-in-law had mentioned. "He meant well," she said. "He gave you legal advice he wasn't qualified to give," I replied. Not harshly, just plainly. And it almost caused real damage. To you, to me, to the kids. She was quiet for a moment. "The kids don't know any of this." "I know. And I'd like to keep it that way." She nodded. Then, quietly, "Are we okay?" I told her I didn't know yet, that I needed some time, and that I thought she needed some time too, to sit with what she'd set in motion, not because I wanted her to feel bad, but because understanding what happened was the only way to make sure it didn't happen again. She didn't argue with that. The formal concerns were dropped. My daughter's attorney sent a letter. Matter resolved, no action taken. 4 sentences. I filed it in the same folder as my medical records and my estate documents. Clean. Organized. Everything dated. The first time I saw my grandchildren, after all of it, was a Saturday in early autumn. My daughter brought them to my house. My wife made lunch. My grandson ran straight to me like none of it had happened. Because from his vantage point, none of it had. My granddaughter hung back for a moment. She's always been the cautious one. And then climbed up next to me on the porch swing and asked me to tell her a story. I told her about a bear who got separated from his family during a long winter, but found his way back in the spring because he'd paid attention to the trail on the way in. She said that was a good story. I said I thought so too. My wife caught my eye over the kids' heads. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat on the porch alone for a while. The sun was going down behind the neighbor's oak tree, the way it does in September, slow and sideways, painting everything the color of something worth keeping. I thought about what I'd learned, not the legal mechanics of it. Those were straightforward enough once you had the right people helping you. I mean the other thing, the thing underneath. I'd spent most of my adult life assuming that love was enough to keep the important relationships from going sideways. That the people who mattered to me understood me well enough that misunderstandings would correct themselves naturally, given time. What I learned in that hospital room and in the weeks after is that love isn't a structure, it's a feeling, and feelings, under pressure, take the shape of whatever container they're poured into. The container matters. The documentation matters. The conversations you have before you need to have them, those matter most of all. I'm not angry at my daughter. I was, briefly, during the weeks when I didn't know what she was building or why. But anger is expensive at 63, and I've learned to spend my energy on things with a better return. What I am is clearer. about what I want my life to look like going forward, about who I want to have those conversations with, about what it means to take care of yourself not just medically, but legally, structurally, in ways that leave less room for fear to make decisions on your behalf. If you're listening to this and something in it sounds familiar, if you've ever felt like a story was being written about you while you were too tired or too sick or too trusting to notice, I want you to hear this part. You don't have to fight loudly to protect yourself. You just have to be more organized than the narrative being built against you. Write things down. Date them. Keep the paperwork. Call the attorney before you think you need one. And don't wait until you're wearing a hospital bracelet to have the conversations that matter. Leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. If this story met you somewhere real, I'd like to know. We share stories like this because silence is how misunderstanding survives, and because sometimes the most useful thing one person can do is simply say, "This happened to me too, and here's how I found my way through it." Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. We'll be here. The porch swing still makes the same sound it always has, a slow creak on the left side where the chain is a little shorter than the right. My granddaughter noticed it the first time she ever sat in it, when she was maybe 3 years old. She called it the squeaky chair and refused to sit anywhere else. That detail stayed with me through all of it. Through the hospital, through the attorney calls, through the weeks when I wasn't sure what I was going to come home to. Some things are small enough to hold on to when everything else gets complicated. What I know now, looking back, is that none of what happened was random. My daughter got scared. Fear moved into the space that uncertainty left open, and then someone with half an education and twice the confidence filled that space with bad advice, and she acted, quickly, decisively, the way she's always done when she feels like something is slipping out of her control. That's not malice. That's a person responding to the world with the tools she has available. But cause doesn't cancel consequence. The papers still got filed. The attorney still called. I still had to build a case to protect my own name while I was recovering from a procedure on my heart. What saved me wasn't luck. It was that I did 3 things right, almost by instinct, and not thought about why those 3 things worked. The first was honesty. I told my attorney about the moment I raised my voice at my grandson. I told her about the afternoon my granddaughter startled when I came around the corner too fast. I didn't minimize those moments or leave them out because I was afraid they'd hurt me. Honesty, even uncomfortable honesty, is the only foundation you can actually build on. Everything else is just delay. The second was clarity. I stopped reacting emotionally about midway through and started thinking structurally. What do I have? What do I need? What does the other side have that I can't afford to ignore? That shift, from feeling to thinking, from absorbing to organizing, was the moment things actually started moving in my direction. Intelligence isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being willing to look at the facts, even when the facts are painful, and then using them instead of running from them. The third was steadiness. There were moments when I wanted to call my daughter and say things I would have regretted. There were nights when the unfairness of it sat on my chest like something physical. I let myself feel that, and then I put it aside and went back to the legal pad, the timestamps, the documentation. That kind of endurance isn't dramatic. Nobody applauds it, but it's the thing that actually determines how situations like this resolve. My daughter and I are not all the way back to where we were. I think we will be, eventually. She is my child, and I have watched her grow from someone who was afraid of the dark into someone who is still, sometimes, afraid of the dark, but who has learned to move through it anyway. That counts for something. What I want to leave with you is this. The people who hurt us are not always enemies. Sometimes they're just frightened, and frightened people make decisions that ripple outward in ways they don't fully anticipate. Understanding that doesn't mean accepting harm. It means you can respond with your head instead of only your heart. Write things down. Date them. Keep the paperwork. And when the moment comes, and for some of you, it already has, be honest, be clear, and be steady enough to outlast the story being told about you. That's the only way I know to take your name back